So, if money has been feeling really heavy for you recently, maybe you're waking up in the middle of the night worrying about debt and feeling like you're the only one in this financial situation, shaming yourself, I'm bad with money. You are certainly not alone, and there is nothing wrong with you. This particular episode and video is going to be focused on a subject which I love talking about, which is debt and shame, having personally experienced in my late 20s a cycle as a financial advisor being in £30,000 worth of recurring debts. And we're going to share by the end of this particular video and episode two things. One, a very simple shame reset to help you to deal and process the emotions that are coming up in the body so that you can feel less shameful, more forgiving, and hold more compassion for yourself. And we're going to choose one of the practical common paths to getting debt paid off quickly, the Snowball or the Avalanche. I'm going to share which of those is my favorites with you. And also we're going to look at this through the lens of neurodivergence. So if ADHD is a part of your story, you're in good company here. So by the end, we're going to have one calming practice, one clear plan, and a debt-free date to move towards. Plus, I'm going to be sharing with you a free audio chapter from my book, It's Not About the Money, and a calculator in the description that you can start to play around with. So let's first of all just acknowledge that in this particular topic area, it's so important to address both the emotional and the practical side to debt, because you can't budget your way out of shame. And you can't shame yourself into financial freedom, which is what many of us are aspiring to achieve. We need to look at both. This is episode 8 of the Breaking Money Cycle series. I've got 7 other episodes breaking down other money cycles, such as why saving more doesn't make you feel safer, why you may self-sabotage success, and why perhaps you're struggling with creating consistent revenue. Plus, I'm adding some free resources to every episode in this series at themoneypanel.co.uk/breaking money cycles. But first, let me tell you that debt is not about knowing more information about money. In fact, quite the opposite. Many people who are in debt actually have a deep fear of learning more about it because they're stuck in those patterns of shame. Right? And shame, as we know, in the nervous system takes us into freeze. So we bury our heads in the sand. And that was certainly the case for me. Back in my 20s and my early 30s, I was earning really good money as a qualified financial advisor. And I was living in my overdraft every single month. I knew the strategies. I knew I shouldn't be spending more money. I understood the power of savings and investing and compound interest. But every single month, like clockwork, I would receive my pay. I would order clothes, have packages building up on my doorstep that I'd ordered at midnight, clothes that I didn't need, things that I forgot I'd even bought, and I would hide things. And here's the thing that no one actually really tells you about debt and shame, that it isn't even about the money. It never is. Your brain doesn't care about your credit score. It doesn't care about the fact that you may be paying high interest rates. It cares about reward and survival. And when your nervous system is screaming out that it's not safe for me to even look at my numbers, then it does exactly what it was designed to do, to give you comfort by avoiding money. Right? And for some people, it's not always about money. It can be food. It can be alcohol. It can be drugs. It can be shopping. It's the same psychological cycle. And impulse spending for me personally was a real dopamine regulation issue. And if you have ADHD diagnosed or undiagnosed, this is even more critical to understand. I didn't get my ADHD diagnosis until my 1940s, until my 40s. But looking back, I wish I'd have known about this link between dopamine and spending, because it would have made so much more sense looking back at my money patterns. And so here's what's happening in the brain. ADHD brains have very low dopamine levels. Now, this isn't the case for everybody who has a diagnosis of ADHD. I personally, from some epigenetic tests I've had done, actually have quite high dopamine levels, but lower other chemical levels in my brain. But in simplistic terms, dopamine is what helps you feel pleasure. It's what helps you get motivated. It's what helps you to stay focused. And when that baseline is low, your brain is constantly seeking those dopamine hits wherever it can find them. And so the cycle is shopping, creates the instant dopamine hits. So we open up the shopping package or we go into a store, we get that dopamine rush, and then we see something new. Again, it creates another dopamine rush. And for a few minutes, even for a few hours, we feel good. But then what happens is we get the dopamine crash. You're left with less dopamine than you actually started with, plus all the shame about spending money that we didn't actually have. So what does your brain do in this instance? Well, in this instance, it seeks another dopamine hit. So that's the reason that this cycle continues. And it builds adrenaline in the body, right? And that's what can create that feel-good feeling when we spend, and then later we crash, and then that's when we get the shame. But you can't willpower your way out of a dopamine deficiency. So it is really important to understand this. So when I look back at my 20s, it wasn't just the dopamine hit, it was the meaning that I was then attaching to my behaviors. So shopping new clothes meant, well, maybe this is showing people that I am successful or I am worthy of buying designer items. But actually, every purchase for me just felt like proof that I'm good enough. But underneath it, I wasn't. I had this deep sense of unworthiness. And so I used money really as a weapon to self-destruct and self-sabotage. And you cannot shame yourself into healing that pattern. So let's talk about the emotions and the feelings around money and debt that could maybe keep you in some of those cycles. The two biggest emotions that are connected to debt, and this is after spending thousands of hours coaching individuals on this subject, are debt shame and debt guilt. But there is a difference. Guilt is something that you have done, and shame is an emotion that is connected to who we are, our sense of self, our sense of identity. And Brené Brown, who is an incredible shame researcher, she differentiates these two emotions really well by explaining that guilt is the feeling that I did something bad, which is quite adaptive. It motivates change. But shame is the feeling that I am bad. It's a belief of being fundamentally flawed and unworthy of love and connection. There is a deep sense of connection in this conversation between love and money. And certainly for me growing up, my unworthiness made me feel like, well, I'm not deserving to have love. I'm not deserving to have money. I can't hold money. I can't hold love. And it was a really deep connection that I didn't make until my mid-40s. And that's why I think it's really important to understand that guilt is about, I'm overspending this month. It's the pattern, it's the behavior. But the shame is, I'm terrible with money. What's wrong with me? Can you see the difference there? So when you're in shame, your whole nervous system goes into contraction. We can literally feel it in our bodies. We go into freeze mode, fight, flight, or freeze mode. So we don't look at our numbers. We go into money avoidance, because that means we have to confront the perceived truth that I am bad with money. This makes sense, right? So it's not that you're just being lazy and avoiding the bills coming through the door. It's actually that shame is keeping you stuck in a cycle of not actually having the capacity or the capability to come out of that money avoidance cycle. And the avoiding actually creates more shame. More shame creates more avoiding. This is why people get stuck in these debt shame cycles. So before we get into any of the practical strategies, I really want you to hear this piece, and I really want to talk about personal forgiveness. Not forgiving other people, but forgiveness of yourself. Because every financial decision that you've made up until this moment in time was the best decision that you could have made with the information that you had in that moment, with the resources that were available to you at that time, with your nervous system's capacity that you had at that time. Now, I've created an audio for you on this, which you can download in the notes or over at themoneypanel.co.uk/breaking money cycles. Go and have a listen to that recording. But right now, I want you to go through a process of personal forgiveness. Now, there's several ways that you can do this. In emotional freedom technique, which is one of the money somatic modalities that I use and we teach in our programs, is to use tapping. And I'll give you a demonstration of that in a second. But there's a process called the personal peace procedure. And this is a process where we can grab a pen and a notepad and write down every financial decision that you've ever made that you are carrying shame around. And for each one of those scenarios, you can write this phrase: I experienced, and then write the situation. I felt, then write the feeling. I learned, and then write the lesson. And then I release the shame. So let me just repeat that for you. So I experienced, and then write about the situation. So that might be, I experienced a situation where I was on my lunch break at work. I went and spent £150. I know I didn't even have that money. I felt a feeling of shame. I learned that actually in that moment, I was really stressed because I just had a super stressful meeting with my manager and I was feeling really angry and I was taking that anger out on myself. I release the shame. Or another example might be, I experienced accumulating £5,000 in credit card debt, even though I just paid it off. I felt terrified and overwhelmed. I learned that I was using shopping to manage my anxiety that I didn't know how to process. I release the shame. And in emotional freedom technique, which is this energy-based somatic tool, we use EFT to bring up the emotions in the body, to really feel them and then release the energetic charge by tapping on various meridian points in the body. It's a little bit like acupuncture, but without the needles. So this would be something like this. Even though I feel this shame around debt in my chest, this heavy feeling of shame in my chest, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. And we tap on these various points. If you're watching this on video, you'll be able to follow these points with me. We tap on these various points. And what this does is it releases the energetic charge. It enables us to actually feel the emotion that we are experiencing when we're writing about these personal experiences. And even just tapping on these various points, which we can find on the crown of the head, right on the eyebrow, the side of the eye, under the nose, under the mouth, on the chin, and then on the collarbone, and then just where we have our bra line, right? These are the various tapping points. And just by tapping through that sequence, we can just help the body to feel the energy, to feel the emotion, and just release. Some people do this through breath work. Some people do this through exercise, bringing up the emotion, kind of getting it out of the body that way. There's lots of different ways that this can be experienced. But I think it's really important to just acknowledge these things first before we move into some of the practical strategies. So let's move on to some of these practical steps. Now, the first one I would say that really worked for me was to draw a line in the sand and create a reset opportunity. So for me, in my 20s, I was living in my overdraft. And so I decided to switch banks. I switched bank accounts. I set up a payment to pay off my overdraft every month, but I had this reset. And what I started to do was to track every single pound, every single penny or dollar in a journal, what came in and what came out. Sounds really simple and can also sound really scary, right? But it wasn't about the numbers. It was about the awareness. It was about understanding how I was feeling, what the cycles or the patterns were, and bringing a lot of awareness, what I call getting financially naked. So that's the first step that you may want to consider. And then we're going to move into these two different methods. So in the kind of personal finance world, there are two main ways to pay down debt as quickly as possible. And by debt, we're talking here about credit cards and loans. Now, method one is called the debt snowball. And how this works is you pay off your smallest debt first, regardless of what interest rate you're paying. So for example, let's say you've got a £500 overdraft, you've got a £2,000 credit card and a £5,000 loan. You would first of all work on paying off the £500 overdraft first, and then you make minimum payments on the 2,000 credit card and the 5,000 loan. And the reason that this works is that you're creating these quick wins, these dopamine hits. It builds momentum, it creates fuel. And then once that first debt is gone, you roll that payment into the next smallest and then the next smallest. Hence the name, right? The snowball effect. And this was a really successful method for me for a long time when I was paying down my £30,000 worth of debt. Every time I paid off a balance, I would cut up that credit card. Some people say like put it in the freezer, but for me, I was like, I have to get rid of it. I closed it down and I celebrated the hell out of the fact that I just got this credit card paid off, right? That celebration is really important. The celebration rewires your brain from I am bad with money to I am somebody who pays off debt, right? So that's the first method. The second method is the debt avalanche method. This works in a similar way, but rather than paying off the smallest balance first, you pay off the debt with the highest interest rate first. So for example, let's say you've got a credit card at 28.9%, an overdraft at 11.9%, and a loan at 5%. You focus on the credit card at the 28.9% first. Make minimum payments on the others. And mathematically, this saves you the most amount of money because it eliminates the most expensive debt first, right? But how do you choose which one of these methods is going to work for you? My suggestion would be, as a personal finance expert and somebody who's been in this situation, is to choose the snowball method if you're dealing with a lot of shame, if you are recognizing that you like those quick wins, if you are neurodivergent, if you're motivated by progress that you can see, then the snowball method for me is the best route. I would go with the avalanche route if maybe you're past the shame stage, maybe you've done some work on that, or that's not really resonating for you, and you're motivated by efficiency, you're very practical, you want to like pay down the highest interest rate first because you know that makes more sense, and you can handle the delayed gratification. There's not one right and one wrong choice. The best method is the one that you're going to follow, right? The next step after considering which of those methods is right is to calculate your actual debt-free date. And knowing when you're going to be debt-free is important. because it's not that it's someday in the future or eventually I'll pay this off. It's an actual date on the calendar. And you can have a play around with the debt calculator that I've put into the resources area to have a look at the debts that you have, the interest rates you're paying, the current payments that you're making. Have a little play around with that calculator. There's also some really fun apps that you can use. The one that I have always recommended to people, which I think still exists, is called the Debt Payoff Planner. And you can put all your information in that app and it will tell you your debt-free dates. And adding like £100 a month actually makes a significant difference. We know the impact of compound interest, and adding £100 actually moved my debt-free date from 3 years to 18 months for one of my debts after I'd paid about half of it off. So that gives you a scenario where you can really think about, well, maybe I'm going to cancel my Netflix subscription, or I'm going to do without this because moving my debt-free date from 3 years to 18 months feels more motivating. It feels more important for me. And it helps you to make those decisions based on what you feel is going to create that momentum and that drive. And I think when you've got that date, it brings that end in sight. Okay, so that's definitely something to consider. Now, there are some alternative strategies that you might also want to consider. I was a mortgage advisor for many, many years, and it could be in some situations that doing some debt consolidation is something to explore. That could be by taking out a loan, an unsecured personal loan, which may have a lower interest rate and one fixed payment to wrap up some credit card debts. And that can help you to reset. There is also scenarios where you may want to consider adding it to a mortgage. So you wrap up all of your loans or credit cards, overdrafts, and put them onto your mortgage. Now, clearly the benefit of a mortgage is that it's typically over a much longer period, and interest rates will therefore be lower and your monthly payments will be lower. And from an interest rate perspective, you are going to pay more interest back. But that's not always the most important thing. If right now you're struggling to pay down your commitments, then that emotional release of just knowing that there is a solution can work for some people. However, one thing I would say is if you're going to do that, then it's really important to then work on the emotional side, work on those patterns and those behaviors, because otherwise you'll end up just recycling those patterns again, right? So that's one thing to consider. The other thing you might want to look at are things like 0% balance transfers. So if you've got good credit, you can transfer high interest on a credit card to a 0% credit card. And that could be very useful. Just watch out for transfer fees. Make sure you take those into consideration. Now, one of the biggest issues I see with why people get into debt in the first place is that they don't have an emergency fund. Although I don't like that terminology, it's a financial security fund or a financial freedom fund, something that gives you the ability to be able to access some money when you need it, of something that is unplanned. So whilst you're paying off debt, start saving, right? Break that cycle. And some personal finance experts will say, pay your debt off first. But for me, seeing money accumulating psychologically was really, really powerful. And it will stop you potentially from putting money back on a credit card because you haven't got money for when the car tires burst. Okay, so that's something really to think about. So it is important to think about the practical strategies and the emotional healing practices, because if you can feel better about your debt, then we can do better with it. And for me personally, the shift happened when I simultaneously started going down the somatic route, releasing some of the emotional shame, practicing some self-forgiveness, really learning about ADHD and how that was affecting my impulse control or lack of, setting up those payoff plans, the Snowball or the Avalanche or the sweeping it up into mortgages or other vehicles, and then getting financially naked. A part of that was about creating boundaries, unsubscribe from the marketing emails, delete the shopping apps, take your credit cards off Amazon. So you've got to actually got to physically go and find the credit card before you can use the app. Even just that psychological pause of going, oh, do I actually really need this? I'm just going to leave it in my shopping basket for a couple of hours or overnight, and then go back to that decision with the card. And you'll be surprised how you decide differently. Actually, I don't really need another book. I've got 10 already on my shelf that I haven't read. This still works for me now, right? I could buy all the books, but actually putting that pause in place really helps in those emotional situations where you might be bored, you might be stressed, you might be hungry. Go and do something else that may create the same dopamine cycle that isn't in the overspend. Okay. And lastly, just know that you don't have to do this by yourself. If you are in significant debt and it's causing significant stress, there are many debt charities that can be super helpful. In the UK, we have Step Change, we have National Debtline, Citizens Advice. If you're dealing with ADHD or depression, anxiety that's affecting your money behaviors, there are also mental health support available through organizations such as Samaritans, ADHD UK, and Mind. And I'll pop a note to all of the details of that into the notes below. If your brain, however, is just working against you, right? No amount of willpower is going to overcome that. And sometimes that support is going to really help you to address the root cause. Therapy is also a great way to understand some of those cycles and patterns. So having listened to this today, I have some action steps for you. So the first step is to go and practice self-forgiveness. Write down what you're carrying shame around and release it. Download that free debt and shame audio that I spoke about earlier at themoneypanel.co.uk/breaking money cycles. Play around with a calculator. Action 2 is to look at your numbers with compassion. Get financially naked, right? Have a look at your options. Pick up the phone and speak to your mortgage advisor or book a session with a financial coach who can talk through your options with you. And remember, it's the small steps that make the biggest impact. So as we wrap this up, remember, you are not debt. Your worth is not determined by the amount of money in your bank account. Breaking the cycles of debt and shame isn't about being perfect. It's about being human, being honest, and being willing to do both the emotional work and the practical work. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I would appreciate a thumbs up on this video and a comment underneath of one thing that you're going to commit to this week. Hit that subscribe button to make sure that you receive notifications on the rest of the Breaking Money series cycle, or the Money Cycles series. And I've also released a free 1-hour training, which you can get on the podcast and my YouTube channel, called Mastering Female Financial Foundations in 1 hour. Everything that they never taught you about money. I'll pop a link to that in the description below. You've totally got this. I believe in you. I am a living example that it's not just about the practical information, right? This is possible for you if we can spend some time considering both the emotional and the practical side of debt. So I'll see you next Monday for the next episode of Breaking Money Cycles.